In 1951, a psychologist named Solomon Asch showed a group of people two cards. On one card, a single line. On the other, three lines of different lengths labeled A, B, and C. The task was simple. Which line on the second card matches the one on the first? The answer was obvious, unmistakable, inarguable. And yet, when the other people in the room, who were secretly actors, all chose the wrong answer, 37% of real participants went along with them. They could see the correct answer, and they chose the wrong one anyway. That experiment has disturbed psychologists and philosophers ever since. Not because it revealed that some people are weak or stupid, but because it revealed something far more uncomfortable, that the pressure to conform operates at a level below rational choice. It is not that people thought the wrong answer was right. It is that social pain, the discomfort of standing apart from a group, was powerful enough to override what their own eyes were telling them. Now ask yourself honestly, if you feel that pull in a lab room with strangers over a line on a card, what happens in real life? In your family, in your community, in your culture, in the institutions that educated you and the platforms that now structure your information environment. Today, I want to take that question seriously. Not just psychologically, though we'll go there, but philosophically. Because the question of why human beings surrender their thinking to the group and what it actually costs them is one of the oldest and most urgent questions in all of philosophy. And in 2026, the year of algorithmic bubbles, institutional distrust, and social media conformity at industrial scale, it has never been more pressing. This is the philosophy of conformity. And by the end of this video, you will see it everywhere. Part 1. The biology of belonging. Why we are wired to conform. Before we critique conformity, we need to understand it honestly. Because the impulse to conform is not a character flaw. It is a survival mechanism that kept our species alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Human beings are the most socially dependent mammals that have ever existed. We cannot survive alone. A child abandoned at birth dies within days. An adult cut off from all community faces catastrophic psychological deterioration within weeks. We are, at the most fundamental biological level, creatures who need the group to exist. This dependency is written into our neurology. Social rejection, being excluded, ostracized, or disapproved of, activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. This is not a metaphor. Brain imaging studies show that social exclusion lights up the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the same region activated when you burn your hand. Social pain is real pain. The brain does not distinguish. What this means is that conformity is, at its root, a pain avoidance strategy. When you feel the pull to go along with the group, to agree with something you're not sure about, to perform an emotion you don't feel, to follow a norm you don't believe in, you are not being intellectually cowardly. You are responding to a genuine neurological signal that says, standing apart from the group threatens your survival. The psychologist Erich Fromm, writing in his landmark 1941 work Escape from Freedom, put it this way: the individual ceases to be himself. He adopts entirely the kind of personality offered to him by cultural patterns. He becomes exactly as all others are and as they expect him to be. Not because he is stupid, but because the anxiety of genuine freedom is so much harder to bear than the comfort of the crowd. So the question is not, why do people conform? The biology is clear. The question is, at what point does a survival mechanism become a cage? At what point does the biological pull toward belonging begin costing us something more important than comfort? Part 2. How institutions exploit the conformity instinct. The conformity instinct is a feature of human biology. But institutions, educational, political, religious, social, have become extraordinarily sophisticated at turning that feature into a tool of control. Let's start with education, because it starts earliest. The philosopher John Dewey argued in the early 20th century that education should cultivate independent thinkers who could participate actively in democratic life. What most modern educational systems actually produce is something quite different. People who are skilled at following instructions, meeting standardized benchmarks, and reproducing approved answers under time pressure. The capacity to ask whether the benchmark is the right benchmark, or whether the approved answer is actually correct, is rarely on the curriculum. This is not a conspiracy. It is an institutional logic. Schools that produce compliant graduates are easier to administer, produce more predictable metrics, and fit more smoothly into economies that require reliable, standardized labor. Independent thinkers are, from an institutional management perspective, a problem. They ask inconvenient questions. They refuse to take inefficiency for granted. They notice when the emperor has no clothes. Hannah Arendt, one of the most important political philosophers of the 20th century, made a related observation after attending the trial of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in 1961. She expected to find a monster. What she found was an ordinary bureaucrat who had simply never developed the habit of thinking for himself. He followed orders. He did his job. He conformed. And the result was one of the greatest crimes in human history. Arendt called this the banality of evil, the terrifying observation that atrocity does not require malicious individuals. It requires only a culture of unthinking compliance. Move from political institutions to social ones. Every community, every family, every religious group, every cultural tradition has mechanisms for enforcing conformity. Most of them don't look like enforcement. They look like care. We're worried about you. People are concerned. Think about what this means for the family. The vocabulary of belonging is used to manage dissent. And it works precisely because it exploits the deepest human need, to be accepted, to be understood, to not be alone. The philosopher Herbert Marcuse described this as repressive tolerance, the way advanced societies appear to permit dissent while structurally neutralizing it. You are allowed to disagree. You are just made to feel so uncomfortable, so isolated, so much like a problem to be solved, that disagreement becomes increasingly costly to maintain. Part 3. The intellectual cost. What conformity actually takes from you. So far, we've talked about conformity as a social phenomenon. Now I want to make it personal. Because the deepest cost of conformity is not social, it is intellectual. And intellectual cost compounds over time in a way that is very difficult to see until it is already significant. Here is what happens when you consistently surrender your judgment to the group. First, the habit of checking your own perception against social approval rather than against reality becomes automatic. You stop asking, "Is this true?" and start asking, "Will this be approved of?" These seem like similar questions. They are not. One is an epistemic question about the world. The other is a social question about the group. Over time, the second question crowds out the first. Second, your capacity for genuine disagreement atrophies. Disagreement, the ability to hold a position that others reject, to maintain it under pressure, to engage with counter-arguments without simply capitulating, is a skill. Like any skill, it requires practice. People who have spent years prioritizing social harmony over intellectual honesty find that when they genuinely need to think independently, when the stakes are high and the crowd is wrong. The muscle is not there. Third, and most damaging, you begin to mistake the group's values for your own. This is the most insidious effect of deep conformity. You are not aware of having surrendered anything, because the values you were given feel like the values you chose. The opinions that were installed feel like convictions you arrived at. And if someone challenges those convictions, the response is not engagement. It is defensive anger, the anger of someone who feels personally attacked, because they have no separation between the social script they inherited and the self they believe themselves to be. The philosopher Immanuel Kant defined the Enlightenment as humanity's emergence from self-incurred immaturity. He defined this immaturity as the inability to use one's own understanding without guidance from another. His prescription, sapere aude, dare to know. Have the courage to use your own understanding. That word courage is important. Kant understood that independent thought is not primarily an intellectual challenge. It is a moral and emotional one. The obstacle is not that people can't think. It is that thinking genuinely, following the argument where it leads regardless of social consequence, is frightening. It risks disapproval. It risks isolation. It risks the social pain that the brain registers as physical damage. And so most people don't do it. Not because they are stupid, because they are human. And being human, in the deepest sense, means being susceptible to the pull of belonging. Part 4. Conformity in 2026. The algorithmic upgrade everything we have described so far is ancient. The pressure to conform, the social punishment of dissent, the institutions that exploit belonging instincts, these are as old as human community. What is new in 2026 is the infrastructure. Social media platforms have built the most sophisticated conformity management system in human history and called it connection. Here is how it works. The algorithm rewards content that generates strong emotional reactions quickly. Strong emotional reactions are most reliably generated by content that confirms what people already believe, validates their group identity, and identifies a clear-out group to disapprove of. Content that challenges, complicates, or introduces genuine nuance generates lower engagement. It gets less reach. It is algorithmically penalized. The result is a feedback loop that is almost perfectly designed to suppress independent thought. You see content that confirms your worldview. You engage with it. The algorithm shows you more content like it. Your worldview becomes more entrenched. Content that challenges it becomes invisible. Over time, your information environment becomes a closed circuit, a mirror reflecting your existing beliefs back at you with increasing intensity, until those beliefs feel not like opinions, but like obvious facts that only idiots or bad people would deny. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the digital swarm, a mass without structure, hierarchy, or memory, driven by instant outrage and endless performance. The crowd no longer needs a physical space. It lives inside every screen. And its mechanisms, approval, disapproval, social inclusion, social exclusion, operate 24 hours a day at a speed that makes reflection almost impossible. There is something particularly dangerous about digital conformity that the old forms did not have. It is invisible. When a community elder pressures you to conform, you can see the pressure. You know who is applying it and why. When an algorithm shapes your information environment to confirm your biases and punish your curiosity, there is no visible agent, no face, no name. Just a steady, imperceptible narrowing of your world, until one day you find that you cannot genuinely imagine how someone who thinks differently from you could possibly be a reasonable person. That is not a political problem. It is a philosophical one. It is the problem of what happens to human reason when its environment is optimized for comfort rather than truth. Part 5. Ambedkar and the conformity of tradition. I want to bring in a thinker who is not often discussed in Western philosophy channels, but who understood the conformity problem with a precision and urgency that very few Western philosophers matched. B. R. Ambedkar, economist, jurist, and architect of the Indian Constitution, spent his life analyzing how conformity to tradition functions as a tool of oppression. He was speaking specifically about caste, but his analysis has applications that extend far beyond it. Ambedkar's central observation was this: the most powerful form of conformity is not the conformity that is enforced by visible coercion. It is the conformity that is enforced by making people believe that the existing order is natural, sacred, or inevitable. When people internalize the values that keep them subordinate, when the oppressed come to see their own subordination as normal or deserved, no external enforcement is needed. The cage is inside. He wrote, "A people and their religion must be judged by social standards based on social ethics. No other standard would have any meaning." In other words, tradition is not self-justifying. The fact that something has always been done, the fact that it carries the authority of the past, the fact that the community agrees on it, none of these are arguments for its value. The only question that matters is, does it serve human flourishing? Does it promote dignity, freedom, and the capacity for genuine thought? When Ambedkar converted to Buddhism in 1956, just weeks before his death, he was explicit that he was not embracing Buddhism as a tradition to be inherited and preserved. He was embracing it as a philosophy of critical inquiry, a framework for examining inherited assumptions rather than reproducing them. He emphasized prajna, wisdom, the capacity for critical thought, as the foundation of the Buddhist path. Not ritual, not community belonging, not the comfort of inherited forms. Wisdom first. Everything else must be built on that, or it is hollow. That is the sharpest possible statement of the anti-conformity position. That compassion without wisdom is sentiment, and sentiment is manipulable. That belonging without thought is vulnerability, not strength. That tradition without examination is not culture. It is a cage with familiar furniture. Part 6. What genuine independent thought actually requires, so what is the alternative? I want to be honest here, rather than optimistic. Because the self-help version of this answer, just think for yourself, is almost useless. It names the destination, without acknowledging the terrain. Genuine independent thought is not a personality trait. It is a practice. And like all practices, it requires specific conditions, specific disciplines, and a willingness to accept specific costs. First, distinguish social pressure from argument. These are not the same thing. An argument gives reasons. Social pressure gives consequences. Here is why your position is wrong, is an argument. Think about what people will say, is social pressure. Here is evidence that contradicts your view, is an argument. Everyone else disagrees with you, is social pressure. Training yourself to notice which one you are responding to is the foundational skill. Not because social pressure is never worth considering, but because it must never be mistaken for a reason. Second, sit with the discomfort of an unresolved question. The conformity instinct is most powerful when questions are open and answers are uncertain. The pressure to resolve uncertainty by defaulting to the group's position is enormous. Resist it. The capacity to hold an open question without prematurely closing it, to say I don't know yet, and I won't pretend to, is one of the marks of genuine intellectual maturity. Bertrand Russell called it tolerance for ambiguity. It is rarer than almost any other intellectual virtue. Third, interrogate the values you were given. Not to destroy them, but to own them. There is a difference between holding a value because you were told to, and holding a value because you have examined it and found it genuinely worth holding. The first is inheritance. The second is conviction. Most people have never put their core values through a serious examination. Not because they are incapable, but because the examination is uncomfortable and the social environment rarely rewards it. Do it anyway. The values that survive examination are genuinely yours. The ones that don't survive, you were never truly served by holding them. Fourth, accept the social cost without catastrophizing it. Independent thought has a price. It will make some people uncomfortable. It will invite criticism, pressure, and sometimes the specific pain of being told that you are wrong not because your argument fails, but because your independence itself is unwelcome. This is real. Denying it does not help. What helps is perspective. The social discomfort of genuine independent thought is survivable. It is painful in the way that exercise is painful. The pain of something that makes you stronger rather than the pain of something that destroys you. The philosopher Bertrand Russell wrote, "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. Doubt is not weakness. Certainty that hasn't been earned is." Closing, we began with a man in a room, looking at two cards, knowing the right answer, and choosing the wrong one because everyone around him already had. That experiment is not a study of weakness. It is a study of what it means to be human. We are built for belonging. We are neurologically wired to feel social pain as physical pain. We were shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution that rewarded conformity and punished isolation. The pull toward the group is not shameful. It is ancient and real, and in many contexts genuinely valuable. But we are also, and this is what separates us from every other animal, capable of noticing that pull, of examining it, of asking whether, in this specific situation, with this specific question, the group's answer is actually the right answer, or whether the discomfort of standing apart is the price of seeing clearly. Kant said, "Dare to know." Ambedkar said, "Wisdom first." Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." They were all saying the same thing from different angles. The examined life, the life in which you actually look at what you believe and why, in which you distinguish your own convictions from the scripts you inherited, is harder than the unexamined one. It is lonelier at times. It is more uncomfortable. It does not offer the warmth of unanimous approval. But it is yours. And that, in the end, is the only thing that cannot be taken from you. If this video gave you something to think about, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Drop a comment below, not what you think you should think about conformity, but what you actually think. That small act, done honestly, is a beginning. Like and subscribe for more philosophy that takes these questions seriously. See you in the next one.